Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode about starting spring seeds, because we're going to do it all over again, but for summer seeds. Well, a little bit of a twist. I don't think we should regurgitate everything the same, do you?
That was absolutely my plan. Copy and paste. This is where things get even more interesting, though. It is. And I think if we get this right, we can get our garden started in the right direction early. So it's really I'm excited
important
about this set of episodes because we have been striving to get our timing right to release these kind of episodes to continue to help gardeners that are listening. And
Right.
I think that this is like we're spot on this year. And that makes me happy.
Absolutely. But before we get started, just want you to know, welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, everybody. I am Ben. I'm with my co-host, Batavia. That's her right there. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron or an Apple subscriber. You'll get an extra episode every month, and you'll be helping support the show and keeping us on the air so we can continue to help people garden and in their gardens. Also, you can buy some seeds from us. I believe you've got a couple days to use the code YBBBB to get yourself a discount. And we have all kinds of seeds available, so please feel free to do so. And check out our Amazon list. As we start talking about seeds and growing them and stuff like that, we have all of our equipment on there that we use. If you buy from there, it does help support the show at no extra cost to you, so please do so. Somebody's got a piece of paper stuck up underneath it. There it is.
Cobwebs.
There it is. You know, that bell that you found is just like, wasn't it just laying around your house?
No. I have 2 cowbells. Those are throwback episodes.
Yeah.
I actually have one that's like literally within reach, a cowbell, but we had to bring it down a notch. So I actually did go onto the interweb and order this bell some years back.
It would have been super weird if you just had it laying around.
Say again?
It would have been super weird if it was just laying around your house. I couldn't remember. It's been so long.
Batavia After Dark. But I do use it to that end in other conversations that I have. So there's that. So I'm trying to think. Last episode, we really talked about first and last frost dates and all that stuff. So if you want to know how to start your spring seeds, your cool season crops, by all means do so. Check that out. And that'll give you the framework for this. But really what we're talking about now is that we're going to be talking about your core summer vegetables, the stuff that you're going to be growing throughout the warm season, the summer in your garden, and getting them started at the right time, I think, is crucial to a garden. What do you think? I do. I think that generally speaking, gardeners there's a little bit more play. There's more you have more things that you can direct sow that really take well for summer crops. You have clearly things that, while we focus on seed starting, and that's what this episode is about, you have more opportunity to purchase transplants if you want. I know that you cringe every time I say that in a seed starting episode. So you have a little bit more room, right, to be a little bit later. I do know, though, personally, you'll be happier as a gardener if you take advantage of the time that we're giving now. So we're in February talking about summer plants, heat-loving crops, and it's right on time for me. And it could be just a couple of days later
than Ben would normally get started, right? So that tells you how important the timing around these summer crops are.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
if
my
you're
defense.
looking, so first of all, Batavia, tomorrow is Valentine's Day, so happy stupid Valentine's Day to everybody. Go buy a card and spend a bunch of money on nothing, but
Happy Love Day, young Ben.
we don't do cards in our house. I might get my wife a little gift, but we don't really celebrate Valentine's Day. It's a Hallmark holiday. But you're exactly right.
My lonely heart says, I'll take some of those hard candies that, It's okay.
I'll get David to make you a card and send it to you.
My P.O. box is on my Be Better Garden YouTube
Easy
channel.
killer. You never know what you're going to get in there.
I know. Be careful.
You never know.
Please,
there
no
might
pictures.
be some photos you can't frame.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, seriously, you hit the nail on the head. If we're obviously recording this a little bit before, but if not, I am right around my seed starting time. I've already started my pepper seeds, but I am actively at this moment starting everything else, and it's in motion at this point. We are on the entrance ramp into the highway, and there is no way to stop at this point because the last frost date's coming. So I do think planning to start seeds is a hell of a lot easier this time for this season than it is spring, don't you?
I agree. I had this visual of the wrong way sign. If you've seen, the entrance to some expressways where you could go, either you're going on or people are coming off. And so when you're like, we're on the entrance ramp, I'm like, are we going the wrong way? So no, there are two pieces here. There are two types of gardeners in this moment, and this isn't your tag forever. But in this moment, you are a gardener that is starting your summer crops, the seeds now, and you have already started your spring, right? Or you're a gardener that is only starting crops for summer, only starting seeds for summer. Of course, there are people that aren't doing any of them, but this episode is about seed starting. And so the approach you take is slightly different depending on if you're a gardener group A or gardener group B. But in any case, the summer things it seems easier in my mind. They're less sensitive when it comes to being indoors than some of these cool weather crops.
They are. And you ever thought about that, why that is?
Because my house is warm and these things enjoy heat.
Yeah.
And the things from the spring are like, really? Do you know how expensive your gas bill is going to be if you keep on cranking the heat up in this house? And do you know that I am not going to survive? That's what the plants are saying to me.
So they're just they're like yelling at you to save money. Yeah, exactly. No, so I think, and we should have discussed this before the show, but what do you think, Batavia, about us kind of, again, going along with the same progress of like knowing when to start your seeds, but really getting into the order of the seeds, and this is where you get a lot of seeds that can go a month in a seed pot too. Mm-hmm. This, the last one there was a handful, but there are quite a few now that can, and then really touching on direct sowing a little bit. Do you want to do that a little bit too?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the reasons why this is different beyond the plants that we're talking about enjoy and thrive in warmer weather and even die depending on how cold the weather could be outside, right? That's one of the reasons. But we open ourselves up for starting many of these things indoors. But there are a number of things that can both be started indoors as well as direct sowed. And so that's a balance I've been really trying to strike. Generally speaking, for me, it's been preference, not necessarily necessity. But yeah, I want to dig into all of those things.
Well, there you go. We made a plan right on there. There you go. Totally organic show. I'm telling you, people. It's organic. No synthetics here.
I normally never agree with what do you think about
there's
going
been
off
times,
script?
There's been times when I've asked that and I immediately been like, ooh, you shouldn't have said that. But no, so again, to kind of recap slightly, your zone doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you know your first and last frost dates. And so for this one, we're going to talk about I'm not going to mess it up this time, your last frost date. So it's really important that you focus on your last frost date and you start to count back. That's really important. You want to count back from there to really figure this out. And this is why I brought up wanting to talk about, the order to start seeds, because there is a number of seeds that can go only a month at most in a seed pot before you risk getting root bound and stuff like that. There's some really aggressive plants for this time of year. And when I say aggressive, it doesn't necessarily mean that they spread. And what I'm saying is that, one, they're just bigger plants, but two, they will grow fast. And you got to be really careful. So you don't want to get anything too root bound in your house.
The average last frost date for spring, we're using that to gauge about how much earlier can you plant these things out, right?
Right.
I can plant these things out X weeks before my average last frost date. For our summer plants, which this show is going to focus on, this is be very careful about planting these before, and in almost all cases, the recommendation is to wait until after this date has passed, your average last frost date, before you plant them. And in that case, for summer, it's about like live or die, right? So these plants, because they're heat loving and they don't necessarily tolerate the colder weather that some are expected to get when it comes to their average last frost date, we want to basically wait until there's some safety that we feel with our weather, right? There's a less likely chance that you're going to get into a weather situation that's going to do harm to these plants.
When you talk about this and this set of seeds and your last frost date, what does your last frost date tell you for those seeds when you start them? Like what on that last frost date, what is your goal to be doing with those seeds by then?
The best version of me as a gardener, what I like to do versus what I actually do. So that last frost date signals to me the chance of a frost coming in is very unlikely. And based on that, the concept is your weather is warming up in a way that, because 32 is the demarcation for, we're getting down to frost and freezing, right? 35 degrees could be a problem for me and my summer plants, right? So I am getting these seedlings, I should say, geared up for their trip outdoors in the next couple of weeks. That's me in my garden. So average last frost date, we used April the 15th last week in the episode, using that same date. I'm looking at these next couple of weeks, these summer plants that I've been nurturing, they're going to be making their trip outdoors to get hardened off. So I may be in a position where I'm not fertilizing at that point, right? I'm getting ready to get some things outdoors. And even if we're starting the harden off process for a few minutes, I'm of course watching my weather as well. So there's that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And just to make it a little bit confusing, I think this is going to be the confusing part of it. I got this sun coming in right here. It's going to be terrible for the video, but that's all right. Check us out on YouTube if you're not. Frost dates. We do have to have a little bit of a conversation about printed frost dates. There's 3 frost dates for every place.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's
love
the second,
bringing this up. I hate bringing this up.
I hate bringing it up too, but it's important. And it's funny. It's the second time in the episode that you've looked at me like something painful just came out of my mouth. And it's typically not seen, but you can get, if you find the right website, there's 3 frost dates. There's an 80%, a 50%, and then I think it goes down to like 20 or 10% after that frost date. The 50%, I mean, it's just what it says. There's an 80% chance there's going to be a frost, and then so on and so forth. So just be very careful. But typically places like the Farmer's Almanac, stuff like that, they give you that 20% last frost date. But the important thing to remember is just because you're not getting a frost, it's just like Batavia said. She was exactly right. It can be 35 degrees. Well, that's not good for a tomato plant, especially a baby tomato plant that came out of your 68-degree house with perfect temperatures day and night. That's not really where you want to be. So we do want to be mindful of that. And we'll definitely get into the differences between Batavia's, frost date time and mine, because they are completely different. But I like that frost date would be considered a time to harden off. I think that should be, it's a moving goal. Again, we need to be fluid to kind of pair with the last episode, but to be able to do that, I think is really important, and take it and say, hey, we're going to work with April 15th because that's the happy medium for us. And that's our fake frost date, just so you guys know. Y'all can pick your frost date and apply it anywhere. But at that date, that's my goal, is to begin the hardening off process at minimum, and to get right into the differences between you and I, Batavia. I can already be hardening off up to a month before that, but every single year on that frost date, I get a frost. And so I need to be very, very careful. Yeah. And I can tell you, as somebody who sells seedlings, how many times I have sold somebody a tomato plant because they didn't understand, and they went out and they planted their tomatoes a month before the frost date, and the frost came and they could not keep up with it and they could not save them. And or real quick, the amount of people that have come to me and said, hey, I planted them out, I was able to get them through the frost, but they're stunted, and we're now into
Attention taxpayers, the IRS is intensifying collections in 2025. If you owe $10,000 or more or have unfiled tax returns, it's time to take action. Tax Network USA's experienced lawyers have saved clients over $1 billion. They're ready to negotiate with the IRS on your behalf. Don't risk wage garnishment, property seizure, or losing your home. Call 1-800-958-1000 today. Get the help you need at 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
June into July, and they're trying to replace tomato plants, and that's not where we want to be.
Yeah, so when you talk about we're not planting early enough, do you feel like you're focused on, what I hear when you say that is primarily these cool weather crops in the spring, and really the cool weather crops in the fall? I think generally speaking, there are opportunities to plant heat-loving crops earlier, but you have to take special care with that. What do you think? When you talk about, go earlier, is there a particular season or type of crops, or are you just kind of across the board saying that?
So hold on, is there a psychologist couch in here I can lay on real quick? So I'm going to be, one thing that I try to do on my YouTube channel and all that is I try to be totally honest, and I'm going to do that right now. And yes, there is a time. So I think across the board, people are not planting their spring crops early enough. And I also think that people are planting their summer crops too early. Now, here's a difference in where I sit. If I go onto this podcast or I go onto YouTube and I say, you're planting your tomatoes too early, guess what's going to happen? Unsubscribe, unfollow. Sure. People don't want to hear that. And that's fine. So live and let learn. And I think it's just like with starting your cool season crops earlier. I think you can get away with it, but you got to be really careful this time of year, because sometimes you don't notice it until, again, a month later and you're like, why isn't my plant growing? And it's like, well, because half of the roots died when you got to 35 degrees. You didn't take those steps and you didn't do it appropriately.
I think there is fine print under every episode. There's fine print under every video on YouTube when we talk about these things. When we're saying that this is what is considered a standard, and then we're saying we believe you can do something different, there is also the fine print of, but be prepared for some potential loss, right? So if you're going to plant your tomato plants after your average last frost date, but earlier than you normally do, if you got 3 tomato plants you plan on planting, maybe only try 1 of them to begin with. If you have 10, maybe only try 2 or 3 of them. Engage throughout the season how those 2 or 3 perform compared to the ones that you planted maybe closer to what you normally do. The caution that we're asking you to take is a great point about you may not come out to a dead tomato plant at the end of April with that April 15th last frost date. But you may end up, we had this question last week under a different circumstance, you may end up with a stunted plant, and it may take you many weeks to realize that that's the case. I want to toss this out to confuse matters more. There are kind of old wives' tales, so a couple of things to note. If you go to the garden centers, which I do, I frequent them in the spring especially. In the summer, I'm a little bit busier, but in the summer too. In Chicago, you're never in March going to see the seedlings, the transplants they're selling outside. They're going to always be in the interior of the store, or like if they have an enclosed garden center where the doors are closed. In March, that's what you're going to see. In April, you may start to see things that, are a bit more outside, but guess what they are? They're cool weather crops.
Yeah.
And once we get closer to the end of April and May, when we get to summer plants, you better believe that no one wants a whole shelf of plants dying because someone didn't pull them in. So that's one indicator. Another indicator, and maybe this is probably more like the North where we kind of use this. Let's use our pretend average last frost date of mid-April. Some folks in the North, in the Midwest in particular, have even May frost dates. You'll see people that say, oh, I don't put my flowers out. Think annual. Let's on the same guise as it's sensitive to the cool weather until Mother's Day. Mother's Day generally is like the first going into the second week of May. So I'm weeks now. Now, again, that's being much more conservative when it comes to what you're planting out. And the difference between last week and this week is we're not racing for many of these vegetables against weather conditions that will let's say, create an issue with the plant we're growing. This isn't broccoli where we're racing against the heat. Your season for summer, generally speaking, is going to be a little bit longer. There are a couple of vegetables that I feel like the earlier you can get them out, the better off you are, but we'll cover off on that separately.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I don't know where you stand on this. I think it might be good to flush this out a little bit. You said something about being more conservative about putting your plants in the ground, stuff like that. But do you think, Batavia, that there's really an issue with trying to test it out, push it a little bit and see hey, can I get this out earlier? If like with a flower and you're putting it out on Mother's Day, I mean, why not the week before?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think Mother's Day is like the 8th or the 9th this year. So that would be 3 weeks after, about 3 weeks after the last frost date. Why not split the difference? I said when people are planting at Mother's Day, they're being more conservative. Yeah. And to the point of, if you have 3 tomato plants, maybe try planting one of them early, because you only know when you know. That's the thing when we talk about these dates that we're starting. Right. You could have a written start date for these, a written planned planting out date for these, but you only know if you could go earlier if you go earlier.
Yeah. So it's funny, the lady up the street from me, she's got a big garden. She's the one that we've talked about before where she eats it, she plants it. Mm-hmm. When she plants her summer garden, mine's already up weeks ahead because they wait for Mother's Day or whatever. So, it's this whole thing, and it's like, I see it, and I mean, she has a fantastic garden, but at the same time, like, you get a little bit earlier, but they don't want to listen. So I'm like, hey, it's cool. Don't worry about it. But there's a lot of things that we can do. And, the equation is the same for this. It's 8 weeks from your last frost date. But what we've kind of determined is that 8 weeks, what that should really trigger is a hardening off process, right? And so let's do two things, Batavia. Let's do what do you think about just going through now and saying, hey, these are the 8-week plants, and then do the 4-week plants, and then we'll get into the hardening off process for these plants, because again, if it's 35 degrees, we got to be very careful.
Yeah. I think, and there are probably 2 or 3 outliers from the 8 weeks, and it's not quite 4 weeks. So, okay.
Yeah. So the longest one is peppers.
That's
right?
one of the outliers. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's another outlier, but yeah, that's almost 12 to 10 weeks ahead. Right.
So I felt really good about starting peppers both mid-March, which means that they're not going into my garden until, maybe Memorial Day here in the States. That's at the end of May. So that puts you right on line of, more like 10, 11, 12 weeks of growing indoors. I've also started peppers many weeks before that. So there is that. Peppers are going to be my first heat-loving crop to start.
Now, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but why are you waiting until Memorial Day to put them in the ground?
So I got all kinds of garden projects that I'm doing. It's not me sitting and watching and saying everything can go in the ground, I'm just going to wait. It's I'm at the store buying lumber, I'm buying mulch, I'm transplanting, the walkways, and I'm doing all kinds of things that are ultimately delaying my planting, which is a good opportunity to take the moment of why the press to plant earlier. Well, it's because I want to get the fruits of my labor earlier. Like that's, that's.
I want to put a pin in that comment that I just made, because I don't, for the record, think that you're necessarily wrong waiting that long to put them in the ground. I think you could probably put them in a little bit earlier, but there is
it's
a purpose.
Definitely safe.
Yeah. And that's what we want to focus on too, as we'll come back to that. But let's go down the list a little bit more. So is there another outlier for more than 8 weeks that you can think of? I can only think of one, maybe.
What do you think about sweet potato slips if you're starting those indoors?
That's a whole different class. That's a whole different class. I mean, that's like, that's yeah. Okay.
I'd say from my experience, eggplants, they seem to be very slow.
Yeah.
Very similar to peppers in how slow they are, both to come up and then to actually put on some real growth.
Yeah,
so I'm
that was
they're
the
in
other
longer
outlier.
Than 8 weeks bucket.
Yeah, I don't think that they are an outlier because they take a long time to germinate like peppers do. I think, like you said, they're just slow, and it's incredibly frustrating.
Well,
to
you know what?
grow them.
Let's piggyback off. Let's go back a second. So peppers are so much earlier than these other crops. I think it's a mixed bag. Some peppers, sweets, I find germinate, 7, 10, maybe 11, 12 days. Hot peppers can take 3 weeks to germinate.
Yeah.
Right. And then in both instances, once you get those true leaves, so, you're not in the cotyledon stage. We're just going to keep on saying that wrong if it's wrong. You're past the point of those first 2 leaves that come up. The next sets of leaves and the sets of leaves after that are just slower, it seems, for peppers. So that's why, I feel really good about a 12-week head start for them. And I do believe the same idea of for the eggplant, if you're starting those, so slow to really kind of produce a sizable plant. And that also depends on what size you want your plants to go into the garden at. So you kind of have to balance that. And this is one of those things where experience is going to be your teacher there. I put peppers in the garden that have 3 true leaves, 4 true leaves. And I put peppers in the garden that, it's already 2 feet tall.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this too, as we get through this all the way up until we get to the 1 month plants, all of these plants can benefit from an up potting one time. Mm-hmm. I'm a big proponent of one time, not
excellent point. Yeah.
Keep going, but up until the 1 month section. And then, obviously you get your tomatoes. Mm-hmm. So tomatoes are obviously 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty solid on the 8 weeks on that. I don't think they need much more than that. What about anything else that's 8 weeks for you?
So tomatoes, I think it's important because tomatoes are one of those that if you go beyond or longer than 8 weeks, they can really outgrow your growing area and be more of a nuisance than you really want to deal with. So I think that's a sweet spot for tomatoes. So 8 weeks. I think that you're always pushing me for one more, and then it's the one more you don't want. So I think some of the herbs, I think some of the herbs like your basil, obviously you can direct sow basil as well.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of something that I'd be starting somewhere close to my tomato. So closer to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I think herbs are, especially like you said, basil. I can tell you that with basil, so until we started packaging seeds to sell, link below, I had forgotten that they're basically dust. Mm-hmm, and one year I poured them all into, they just kind of like came out, and they came into one seed cell tray, a whole packet of them. And what I ended up doing is just letting them grow. And then I would take them and pick off pieces, and each piece would have like 10 plants in it from the seed cell. And then I started more from that, and they did great. It was really easy. So yeah, I think that's a good one. And really, when it gets into it too, you can start looking at stuff like okra. It's definitely not 8 weeks, but that's like a weird bridge one where 6 weeks to 4 weeks maybe, and even a great direct sow candidate. Yeah. On top of that, and a lot of the 4 week plants are all going to be direct sow candidates as well. So, and when I say candidates, it's not like you could do it. It's like you're almost just as good to do it as you are to start it inside, depending on what you want.
I think your growing area challenges you may have had in prior years really dictates what makes sense, your schedule, how much time you have now versus later. So if it's your first time planting these things, starting these things, I say give it a go and start them indoors. But also, if you have room, direct sow some things and see which plants do better. I know that's something we commonly say. I believe, generally speaking, a plant that has started in the soil directly where it's going to grow is going to perform better than something that's introduced to the soil. It has less work to do to acclimate because, again, it was born there, right? But the conditions that we're gardening in don't always make that the easiest route, right? So for me in particular, a good example is a melon, any melon plants, right? Those are your 4 week kids. And what I found is I have trouble getting things to, once they've germinated, live past those first couple of cotyledon leaves and really kind of produce. And remember, I'm also coming from a place where I have other things growing in the garden at that time. So for me, it's easier for me to take a plant. I know what it is. I've started from seed indoors and then transplant that in.
Right. That's
the best version of me.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That means I don't always do it.
So I agree with you that direct sowed plants will typically do better. The question really becomes is that plant have enough time to do what it wants to do in order to give yourself the appropriate harvest for your garden? Okra is a really fast grower and it's a heavy, heavy producer. It produces very heavy. So that's absolutely one. But like a tomato, you can absolutely direct sow anything, but a tomato takes a long time. Yes, Batavia.
I wish that we could just push a replay button. Is it going to have enough time to do what it needs to do in the garden? Paraphrasing what you just said. That's so critical across the board. Does it have enough time to produce in the best version of itself? Broccoli in the spring, we've talked about that. We didn't say that directly, but that's what we're talking about. The reason why many people in the Midwest aren't direct sowing tomatoes is because if you look at an 8-week growing period, if you have 8 weeks from May 1st, I may not have time to really get the full production.
Yeah.
If I'm in, let's say, May, June, July, my plant is finally getting to the same size outdoors, maybe a little bit bigger than it would have been if I would have planted it directly 2 months prior. So I'm in July 1st and I'm just getting to a 1.5 foot tomato plant. I only have July, August, September really for that plant to produce. So I'm just going to get a head start. And that's the reason why I'm starting something like a tomato indoors.
Absolutely. I mean, same with peppers. I mean, you can, how many times have you let something just sit on the ground or on the plant, it falls, and then you get volunteers, and they absolutely will grow, but it takes imagine an eggplant, my God, you'd have to wait 2 years for it to finally do anything after it comes out of the cold. I mean, it's ridiculous. So you start thinking about that, and it's, does it have enough time? I know I've said this before, but I was a couple years ago, I was going turkey hunting, and, I saw these buses that were cut in half. They were like giant flatbeds. And I saw people like piling out of them into the fields, and they all were planting. They had hands full of crops, like seedlings. And I didn't know what they were. And I was like, well, what is that? Well, I didn't pull over and ask them. I just kind of, as I drove by, I watched. They were planting corn like that. They had started corn. And they were, planting out instead of direct sowing the seed. Now, these aren't huge farms around my house, but, they're a couple acres, something like that. And, it was the same thing. They wanted to make sure they had the time and they had the germination to get it in. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same with the tomatoes. You want to make time. I mean, I could put a tomato seed in the ground and easily get a harvest within one season. But if I start them in my house, I can get a full harvest and then turn around and get a second harvest out of it, doubling the production and then getting a fall crop planted in the same space in the same year. So you can see there's definitely a benefit to that. But getting back to what we were talking about, the 1 month plant. So these, you don't really want to keep them anywhere longer than a month in a
Attention taxpayers, the IRS is intensifying collections in 2025. If you owe $10,000 or more or have unfiled tax returns, it's time to take action. Tax Network USA's experienced lawyers have saved clients over $1 billion. They're ready to negotiate with the IRS on your behalf. Don't risk wage garnishment, property seizure, or losing your home. Call 1-800-958-1000 today. Get the help you need at 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say, ahoy, or land ho, and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
A seed starting pot. The first one's going to be your squashes. I think that's hands down. Mm-hmm. You got one?
Summer squash, zucchini.
Yeah.
Any of your patty pan like summer squash.
Yeah. Melons. Cucumbers are a good one.
Pumpkins you throw in there. Yeah.
Pumpkins, absolutely. And, winter squashes, all that stuff. And even still, I think okra falls right in line with that too. Okra is a real complicated little plant if you think about it. And little is not really the word to use for it. Did you hear about the world record okra in North Carolina this year?
No, I didn't.
19 feet tall.
Oh, wow.
I think she broke the record. She was harvesting it every day with a ladder.
Wow. The only other thing I think sunchokes and sunflowers are the only thing I've seen people online like with a ladder trying to tend to. Is how often you're harvesting okra. Oh my gosh. You wonder at that point when it's grown that way, how edible they are. I have to look that up now.
Well, I think you just get to a point where I just want to break the record. I don't care.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. The 4 weeks, and the reason why there are 4 weeks are a couple of different reasons. Some of them, they don't necessarily transplant the best So there's idea of they grow so fast, they may get root bound. And that's the reason why you want them to be younger going into the garden. And if it's only 4 weeks, one could argue, oh, well, you might as well just direct sow it. So that's when I kind of flip a coin. This year, I want to start those things indoors. It all is going to depend on my schedule, timing, how everything else is moving about in the garden, in my personal life. And it's my default would be direct sowing them. My preference is to grow them, sow the seed where they're going to live. But because of in my garden, I've had trouble with bugs eating my seedlings when they emerge and after they've been direct sowed. I feel safer and I feel like my chances increase of getting an actual plant to grow if I transplant it in. But that's me in my garden. That's not always been the case. It's kind of like the environment my garden is now. That's where I'm at. So those are the reasons why, you would have me do something like that. I want to go with winter squash. I think the best chance of me getting a nice winter squash harvest, because those are longer growing crops. It's different than cucumbers. Cucumbers are quick to germinate, quick to grow, quicker to produce compared to a winter squash plant like butternut squash could take 110 days. So if I could get ahead by 30 days by starting those inside and then getting them transplanted, I'm better off than starting from day 0 by direct sowing them. That's me in my climate, knowing that my hot weather is going to wrap up about September. And it's, who knows what the weather is going to be like in October. Who knows? Timeanddate.com, past weather.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if you think about it too, it's like when you start the plant and you go to, so all of these are very frost sensitive plants. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that if it's 35 degrees, they're going to die? No. But what that means is if it's 35 degrees, they're going to get stunted. They could get hurt. They cannot do what they need to do. And a lot of them won't germinate when it's that cold. The seed will just sit there and rot. So what that means is, this is the point, Batavia, where we take that pin and now we're going to pull it back out that we were talking about earlier. And what I'm referring to is your soil temperature. And look, don't get hung up on the soil temperature. If it's consistently above, and the key number here is 50 degrees, consistently above 50 degrees, then you can start to get to where you can put many, many things in the garden. Like, for instance, my last frost date is not until April 15th, but I don't plant my sweet potatoes until usually May 15th. And that's a solid month later. And that's simply because that allows me to get all of that warmth into the soil and get it to really enjoy being planted out instead of being stuck in the ground and really being too cold. Yeah. So it's the same with everything else. You could absolutely take and stick a seed of a winter squash in the ground in, if my last frost date's April 15th, let's say May 1, but it probably won't be warm enough. So what happens is that seed will just kind of sit there. And if it doesn't rot, then it'll grow, but it'll grow slowly. Whereas if you take it and put it in, let's just say April 7th, because we warm up very quickly here, then you can it'll start and it'll take off and it'll grow. So I use that Seminole pumpkin I grew last year that grew so big. I direct sowed that in May 15th. I direct sowed it and it took off, but it was slow at first. But as it got hotter and hotter, and you'll see this with many plants like eggplants, melons, winter squashes, black-eyed peas, okras, as it gets hotter, they grow more. Yeah. Because that's what they want. So it's really important to understand that, because we need to get into the hardening off process and why that last frost date's important for that.
I was already harvesting some of those black-eyed peas. I'm starved. That is absolutely, if you're watching the video, this motion is absolutely me rubbing my belly. So hardening off, my 2 cents being short, because I've gone a little bit long on most of these responses, is I'm never hardening off any summer things before my average last frost date as a rule. So I'm going to start there. I'll pass the mic.
Okay. So I do, and that's because my weather will allow me to. And when I say my weather will allow me to, I wish I was lying, because I know Batavia is going to secretly hate me and make a comment about it in the future. So I just pointed out in March, we can be 70 degrees and 50 degrees, 70 in the day, 50 in the day, 75 in the day, 55. We can easily be that, but we always have that possibility. And so I'm like super laser focused on the forecast. So I can be hardening off beforehand. But what that means is I need to be prepared to bring everything back inside if it gets cold. And there's times where I will have a fully hardened off vegetable and it will sit on my porch for 2 to 3 weeks, and I'll bring it in 8 times over that period just to make sure that that it's protected. So, and even then, after the first frost date comes, it can still sit there for a couple weeks, or usually it's about a week afterwards. I usually start getting my tomatoes in the ground about a week afterwards, and it's solely just watching the weather to make sure I get that timing right.
So you mentioned you do it earlier because your weather allows you to, and I'm not because of my weather, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at offcameratimeanddate.com. So the April 2024 schedule for weather, I have highs in the 60s and 70s, kind of the week before my average last frost date, and I have lows as low as 45. That's not the end of the world,
no,
but I'd like it to be a little bit warmer as a low. And it brings me to a really important point. Don't look at the warmest part of the day when we talk about these summer plants and hardening them off and planting them. You really want to pay attention to the nighttime temps, which generally are going to be your low temps for the day. That's really important when it comes to we're trying to be careful and not put our plants in harm's way. Right. And so that's a part of the reason why I don't plant my sweet potato plants until I get into June. Now, again, I think that's probably one of the last ones that I'll push to go much earlier. Maybe it's the first week of June and not the second week like I normally do.
Right.
I think that those are just so much more tender. It's a tropical plant, right? I've seen cold damage on sweet potato leaves. Not necessarily the roots or the vines, but sweet potato leaves. I've seen cold damage from plants that are outdoors. And we're talking about temperatures that are probably in the high 40s as a low, and that's 40 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even in the 50s, right? So in an ideal world, I'd get up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit as a low for my sweet potatoes, but I'd be like in July planting them. And back to Young Ben's point, do I have enough time for that plant to grow, to produce in the way that I want it to produce? The later I get, the less likely I'm going to have the produce, the harvest that I want.
And some of these plants will absolutely let you know when it's too cold. Now, when if my plant has been out and my tomatoes have been hardened off and it gets to 45 degrees, I'm not overly concerned about that. What I'm concerned about is the wind at night, making it cooler around them. So, you could throw a towel over them or something like that. But once we get them in the ground, what we really want to look for is a period where it's not going to be stressful for them. So you just want to look for a couple days where they can get in the ground. You don't want to put them in the ground super early. You want to get them in and then let them kind of enjoy nice temperatures, let them settle. And then if it comes in, fine. But you want to be able to protect them too. So, any way you can cover them, if you get a little bit of coolness, you can. But I think the point is we always want to try. Let me rephrase that. I always want to try to get it in as early as I can, but as safely as possible. I want my cake and I want to eat it too. And I want the icing on it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I want.
Yeah. So when we talk about we want to go ahead and get the thing planted, and 40 something may not be a problem and 50 something is more ideal. Whenever you get to the point of actually transplanting it in, if you have the luxury, even though it's completely hardened off, my preference is to harden it off and then plant it out on an overcast day. Right. You know, so my seedlings may have been sitting in the sun for days and days because, again, they're completely hardened off. That's one of the steps with hardening off a tomato plant and other summer loving plants and plants in general. But there is a level of trauma that the plant is experiencing going from whatever growing medium it's in to the actual ground. And if you can do that before, right around a overcast day, maybe before, and this is tricky, like a light rain, that's more ideal. You want to avoid putting them in the ground when you have high winds. You want to avoid the sunniest part of the day putting them into the ground. My recommendation, as those last two notes are, you want to avoid heavy rains coming in and you putting those plants into the ground. Most times they will acclimate, but let's create the better scenario for them to actually complete the transplant process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, we can't all wait for a cloudy day. Sometimes they just don't come, but planting them in the evening or covering them that first day, anything like that will help. So, that being said,
one of the tricks real quick. I have the cheap landscape fabric that's like, it's no good for landscape, like weed barrier fabric, but I bought it for some other project a couple of years back and I've used that. So if it's not that, it's, a shade cloth if you already have it. That has been super helpful when it comes to me transplanting things in and helping them acclimate, giving them a little bit of shade, in those first couple of days as I'm transplanting them in. So that's just a trick. I don't do it every single time, but I found it helpful when I do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you can set up shade to help ease the process, it helps. So that being said, we do need to tell you that the Planter app is a longtime supporter of the show, and we bring it up because, again, when you talk about all of these planting dates, you definitely want to utilize it and plan out your garden so you get the layout that you want. It's a very useful, it is a drag and drop interface, square foot gardening centric. Everything is basically square foot in the garden because that's how we measure it, but it works out well. It's got a seed box, so it keeps track of all your seeds, flowers out the wazoo, so you can plan for that. Because let's face it, this is Garden 2.0 season. This is the planning season, so we can get to planting. So check it out. Use the link below to get yourself a discount, and it is the Planter app available on the Google and Apple Play stores. Ding. Okay, so we've got a question of the day, Batavia. I'm going to give you an option. Do you want to answer a question or do you want me to go over how I start my sweet potato slips?
Both.
Only one. We only got time for one.
Let's go over how you start your sweet potato slips.
Okay. So a reason why is because we're talking about timing and everything.
And this is also how I now start them too, so go for it.
Yeah. So timing is very important. And what I'll say about the timing portion of this is you can take a sweet potato and you can start the slips. And if you have too much time, you can remove the slip if it has a little bit of a root on it and then stick it in some water and then kind of keep the sweet potato going. So we can do that. So what I do is I have a tray. It's seed starting trays are sold 10 by 20 inches. And I fill it up with dirt. It's got holes in it. And you can use like a tinfoil tray, whatever you want. And what I do is I take my sweet potato. Ideally, it would have little bits of slips in it already. What do we call those, Batavia? They were, we used to joke about it a lot. Chitting.
Yeah.
It'll be chitting. So I love the term. But chitting. So you put that in, you cover it with soil. Now you want to put a heat mat underneath that soil, get that soil nice and damp, and then put a dome over it because that heat, that humidity, remember, sweet potatoes are a tropical plant. So they're going to start their process much faster. And then that's how we do it. So you cover up the sweet potato and then they'll come up. Usually they only come from one end of the sweet potato as well. And the other thing is you don't need a giant sweet potato, okay? I typically use sweet potatoes that are probably, I'm holding up 2 fingers if you're watching YouTube, probably anywhere from 2 fingers to 1 finger thick. They're usually the scraps that I have left over. And one sweet potato about a finger or 2 wide will give me upwards of 8 sweet potato slips. And one thing I did last year as well is, so I started them way too early and they got really big and I ended up cutting them in half. And then I would take the top half, stick it in the water, and then it would grow roots. So I was able to do that. And then what I do, just to kind of put the icing on the cake, I stick them in soil and like a seeds tray. Mm-hmm. You know, the 6-packs, I'll stick I'll stick one in each one. You want plenty of soil so you start to get roots not wrapping, but growing more actively. And so once you get those hardened off and you get those into the ground, then you will start to have more growth because they already have roots. They're ready to go. The problem with ordering slips and stuff like that is you don't really have any roots when you get them. The plants are usually rather beat up and they've got to recover. It's just it doesn't work well. So that's basically what I do. The really important part is heat and humidity, heat and humidity, heat and humidity. I told you 3 times, don't forget. It's changed the game for me. I don't stick a potato in water anymore, and I'm going to be straight up because when you stick it in water, it smells like a fart when it starts to rot, and I don't like that.
All right. Moving along, my 2 cents. The only thing that I do differently is the contraption that I use when I start them. So I'll use like a tomato, those plastic containers that give you tomatoes in, like it already has holes in it. I'll use something like that, some type of plastic vessel. If it doesn't have holes, I'll put holes in it. I have started some things in the 10 by 20s and put holes in it. I've not done that with sweet potatoes. I may do it this year. That's the only thing I've done differently. With my successful starts. Last year, I had the best sweet potato slips that ultimately go out into soil and then transplanted into the garden. This is where we're using our tools, right? So the reason why I knew this would work when it came to moving the slips into soil before they go into the garden is because that's how I bought sweet potato plants from the garden. They came in 6-packs. So I planted those that came in 6-packs a couple of years ago and had success. So I knew I could mimic that, right? It's another good example of these plants are further along. I'm erring on the side of caution when we talked about the temperature and all of that. But to plant just the slip itself that has roots, there's still that a different level of acclimation that it needs to do when it goes into the soil. I approve the ad that Ben just did for starting sweet potato slips. That is the way that I will do it going forward. I do want to note that I've done it suspending them in water. I've had probably a 33% success rate with it. I've done it where I've put them just in soil. So the same way that young Ben described, but with no heat, no humidity dome. Not that much success, actually 0% success. So I've also done like a sweet potato directly outside because of the space I had, a container. So I've directly planted a sweet potato that maybe has some chitting that's happening. So you have the little, vines, and I put it directly inside of the ground. That's one of the common questions. Well, can I just plant the potato? It produced some sweet potatoes, but I'm talking about like 2 or 3 or 4, what you would think about baby white potatoes. It's that size for a sweet potato. And that's just a waste of my growing time and space, to be quite frank. As a matter of fact, I've done it for the aesthetics, for the vines that grow out, because they will grow vines. They just won't grow the tubers when you do it that way.
So, just to kind of put a couple things into perspective. If you put the potato just in the ground, it will not produce a potato.
I'm telling you that it will.
It will, but the way that it does is because that slip had branched off and created something small. So the initial function of it is not to produce a potato.
Exactly.
The way
you
that
won't
we
be satisfied with it.
You will absolutely not. So you have to remove the slip. And the other thing that I will say is the reason why I put them in the soil was the same reason why you did, because I had purchased them like that in the past. And then last year I also purchased some in soil and I planted mine out. No, it was the year before. It was a year before and I did not do that. But I planted them out that I bought. And what I noticed when I harvested them, all the sweet potatoes were all mangled and bent around each other because they were overgrown in that seed starting pot. So I was very careful about that. to the point last year where I pulled them out, and if they were too root bound, like they were starting to wrap, I would just get rid of them. I wouldn't even plant them because there's no point in having a ball of like you can't break them apart. So they would just rot. So yeah, but that's why I did it too. And I think that's a really important thing to point out, Batavia. I like that you pointed that out, is you've seen it done. Now mimic it and make it better. And that's how you get better at gardening and raising your, and look, it's more than gardening. It's raising your own food, you know. It's breaking yourself from the chain of food, you know, the Food Network. And
vegetable by vegetable,
yeah, one piece at a time. So that's how I do my sweet potatoes, and that's the only way I'll do my sweet potatoes. Couple things to kind of add in though. If you don't have a heat mat, you can do it on top of your refrigerator. Your refrigerator releases heat when it's on. So that will help. Just make sure you put a cover on it. Even a sunny windowsill will help get it started. I don't subscribe to that it's enough light, but the heat coming in from the sun will help get that heat to get those slips going. And a lot of times you can just put a potato up there a month before you even do it, and it'll start that chitting process. And I just got to say too, I love saying the word chitting. It's so great.
Last year I started my sweet potato process. I think it was March the 13th. I'll be starting closer to the end of February this year for me. Remember, my sweet potatoes, the plants themselves, as I plant them out, they're not going into the garden until more like the first week of June. So when you do that math, understand that there's a lot of growth between the time of me starting and the time of me planting them out based on my weather. If you're using a heat mat in general, as well as for sweet potatoes, just keep an eye on watering. Again, they're going to dry things out faster than if they weren't sitting on a heat mat.
Yep. And also get yourself a quart jar and fill that quart jar up with water. And then just, like I said, take your knife. And I mean it when I say knife, and you go in and you cut right at the base of that sweet potato slip. And when you cut at the base of that slip, you're going to get a piece of that root. But what you also want to do after that is there's a little white curve at the bottom. Go ahead and cut that curve off and just leave one root on there if you can. One little itty bitty root, but cut that curve off, because if there's any disease or anything inside of that sweet potato slip, that's where it's at. So you're eliminating disease from the mother plant. So cut that little white piece off. You'll see it when you cut it off. And then you stick that into that cup of water, and you can keep that same sweet potato will continue producing until you're ready to throw it out. And I even left them out. I took the tray out and left it outside last year. I was like, I didn't know what to do with it. And I had like 30 more slips grow off of them. So, you can keep going that way. And then you can plant them in your yard.
That last bit is more like, again, propagating, so if you do any kind of, take a clipping from a plant, a regular, house plant, that it's the same idea once you get to the point of having the glass of water, or a quart of water.
I love propagating. That's my favorite thing to do.
I know you do.
All right. That's it, everybody. So thank you for watching the Backyard Gardens podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron, becoming a subscriber. Hit our Amazon list, buy some seeds, code YBBBB for a couple more days. You can get yourself a discount. And check us out on our YouTubes as well, where we are continuing to help in our own voices without each other influencing each other too much, even though we do influence each other, but it's different. So come check us out. And remember, on that note, we do two things. We learn to grow, and we grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.